China and this hypersonic weapons test. And I really wanted to take some time before I started and weighed in on it because I know people were making such a huge deal about it start. It didn't seem like as huge of a deal to me. And I think there's a really great piece here by Moon of Alabama titled Pentagon Generals, News Writers Abuse Chinese Test Flights to Argue for More Weapons, where he goes and explains what actually happened here. And so while I guess maybe there was a technical step forward here for China from what they tested, it wasn't anywhere near as significant as claimed, and also wasn't some new crazy revolutionary technology. I mean, we have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, actually saying that this was a Sputnik moment for people who maybe don't know. Apparently, I think it's 57 when the Russians lost their first satellite into orbit. The U.S. had no idea Russia even remotely had, or I guess the USSR, the Soviets, even remotely had that technology. And so that was supposed to like be a big, surprise and everything like that. Now, from General Mark Milley's perspective, this should be seen as an admission of failure, right? Like when Congress heard that, they shouldn't be like, "Oh no, General, what do we now do?" They say, "General, what is wrong with you? You are, you're the head of the military, and you're telling me that you guys can't figure out that China is testing hypersonic missiles? How could we possibly be this surprised?" And also, where are you tendering your resignation letter? Because this is absolutely unacceptable. Same thing for the CIA. How they could possibly be surprised of Chinese hypersonic missile abilities and tests is unbelievable and ridiculous. Also, when you look at, and this was made in the New York Times article by David Sanger that, was the big to do about this whole thing, that there were two tests over the summer of Chinese hypersonic missiles. So it was completely ridiculous that this was like a big surprise or everything like that. And that's one of the first propaganda lines you have here. The next one is essentially what this is a vehicle that could be launched into low orbit or orbit, I guess, and then be maneuvered and brought down somewhere on Earth, right, at hypersonic speeds, so speeds at 5 times the speed of sound. That's the alleged technology that China has developed here. And so, as Moon of Alabama Law points out, it really doesn't make sense to say that this in some way really shifts or it makes a major change to maybe China having first strike ability, the U.S. having a first strike ability, or anything like that. The U.S. ground-based missile defense systems that are housed in Alaska and California, they actually don't even have enough to shoot down all the Chinese missiles should they set them off. So even, let's say, all of our ground-based missile defense systems go 100 for 100, all of them take out the Chinese missiles that are launched. Guess what? China still has enough missiles and nukes to hit U.S. cities. So this really doesn't change a whole lot in the calculation there. Also, the big problem is the U.S. Missile defense systems are nowhere near as accurate as they claim. So of course things could or indefinitely would get through if if China did launch their intercontinental ballistic missiles at the United States, the ICBMs. And so this really doesn't make a major change in the nuclear balance between the U.S. and China. And then, of course, the big thing that he points out is this really isn't technology that's beyond the U.S. space shuttle program, right? If the U.S. really wanted to, they could strap a nuke into one of those things and, deploy it somewhere on Earth, and those things could travel very quick. Now, of course, they've been phased out and everything like that, but this is obviously technology that the U.S. has and could develop, and isn't all that much different than technology that the Soviets actually looked at developing in the 1960s with the fractional orbital bombardment system. And this is just a part of evolving nuclear technology, of course, but it's not a major step forward, or it's not a major shift in the balance of power or anything like that. What this is it's a propaganda tool being used by the Biden administration and the military industrial complex, as highlighted in the Moon of Alabama. And this is kind of where I'll wrap up my talk on this, is they say that the Chinese test may well form the basis of a new arms race at the very moment that President Biden has been looking for ways to avoid a proposed $1 trillion modernization of the American nuclear forces and delivery systems. And so what this is saying, as Biden maybe isn't looking to go full blast into this multi-trillion-dollar spending on nuclear weapons, we have this happen. It's now what the Hawks are going to use to say, Mr. President, we have to spend all this money. Or, you'll even have the lunatics out there like Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton, even maybe some Democrats, I'm sure Liz Cheney will all go, oh, the president is owned by China. Look, they're developing new missile technology and he's cutting the budget for the U.S. military, even though we outspend China on military like 4 or 5 to 1 or something absurd like that. So, this is being made a big story in the media. I've even seen a lot of libertarians talk about like China is making some major developments and that we should be worried about the Chinese threat. That I really don't think that's the case. Now, one thing that seems to me to be a pretty clear indication that this is the case is the CIA has recently opened a new center focused on China. And so if the US was really surprised by a Sputnik moment, right? Completely out of the blue, China develops a new technology. We can't even believe they have it. We don't know how to do it. Oh my God, isn't this scary? Then why the hell is the CIA new anti-China task force center more concerned about Taiwan than the Chinese hypersonic weapons? I think that's the that's pretty much all you need to know here. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, October 26th. Taiwan is a top issue for the CIA's new China Center, and the head of that, or I guess the CIA Deputy Director David Cohen, said that China will be the number one issues. And that's the focus there for Taiwan. Very interesting, and I think a major problem for kind of the narrative that hypersonics are what we all should be worried about when it comes to China. The CIA doesn't seem to have it even as the top priority, especially if there's the intelligence failure that's involved. Of course, again, no concern with the CIA on China, right? They have this brand new technology apparently. You would think heads should be rolling there, but nobody is even remotely interested in any reevaluation. Now, we also have the FBI involved in an anti-China effort. This, again, Dave DeCamp. The FBI asks U.S. businesses to work with the FBI closely to counter China. FBI Director Christopher Wray, Dave writes, urged private companies Tuesday to work with the agencies to counter China and prevent the Asian country from becoming the world's only superpower. That's right. China is going to apparently steal enough American intellectual property, and that is going to make them the number one, not only the number one, but the only world superpower. This is just completely absurd. Look, IP shouldn't even exist, and it's completely ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying that there's no like Chinese hacking or that like cyber espionage. Of course, all that stuff does happen. China, I guess, at least manufacturers in China, I guess I've read enough articles that I feel pretty comfortable with this. They make a lot of counterfeit stuff. Happens. They sell it to other countries and stuff, but this is the market at work, and a whole bunch. Like if a Chinese company is able to make an iPhone a hell of a lot cheaper, then that just gives more people in the world access to the iPhone, right? So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and not something that's going to displace America as being the number one superpower. I think the FBI and helping like the Clinton campaign funnel Russiagate conspiracy theories into the U.S. mainstream does far more damage to the United States than any China looking at our IP or stealing our IP or anything like that. So we have some clarification now on U.S. troops training Taiwanese troops. This actually comes from Taiwan's president, who is a part of the pro-independence party. And so anytime you hear something that the Taiwanese president is doing, you may want to consider if their effort is actually to sow more division between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. That way, the U.S. puts more security, guarantees more protections of Taiwan, which will allow Taiwan to declare more independence and be more overt about their separation from China. And so she confirmed that there's a small number of U.S., I think, special forces training Taiwanese forces. Now, this was well known. I'm sure China had enough espionage and surveillance capabilities to be aware that this was going on. But the public admission by Taiwan's president has provoked China to say that, Washington really needs to abide by the one China policy that was agreed on in the 70s, where, we say that China is one state, and that includes Taiwan, even though the U.S. will support Taiwan defense. That's not supposed to be overt or anything like that. And so it's violation on the one China policy to had the U.S. training like this, and that's why China is even more upset. And I'm sure this is going to provoke China to probably maybe put more military assets across the Taiwan Strait. They're going to carry out more flights in Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Of course, on the show several times I've explained how this is very different from Taiwanese airspace, and so that's something important to remember. We have one important statement from Taiwan's defense minister that I wanted to bring up, and that is, he said the island should rely on itself for defense, and that there was relying on faith that the U.S. would intervene in the case of a Chinese invasion. And I think this is maybe something that the Taiwanese should realize, that while the U.S. politicians, Joe Biden, etc., the whole military industrial complex is absolutely on board with the U.S. defending Taiwan against the Chinese invasion, because they don't see that invasion happening. They think they would win if it would happen, and they think that they'll get to sell Taiwan and develop a whole bunch of new weapon systems and rape the American people for trillions of dollars over this perceived threat of China invading Taiwan. What they don't realize is that the American people, even no matter what polling shows, I really don't think the American people, when they look at a map where they realize where Taiwan is and how much it would cost, how many American soldiers would end up dying for it, I don't think that they're really going to send a whole generation of their sons to Taiwan, sons and daughters now, to Taiwan, to be killed to defend Taiwan, especially when it's so clear that if, a war really did break out, maybe in a temporary sense, but in the long term, there really wasn't anything the U.S. could do to repel an invasion of Taiwan. And so with that, another fruitless war, the American people don't want it. And so while our politicians will talk tough on our behalf, when the time comes that the American people are enough against it, depending on how the politics are playing out at the time, maybe we actually don't come to Taiwan's defense, and that could put Taiwan in a position where they really get militarily wrecked by China. And so that is probably a smart calculation for the Taiwanese defense minister to consider. Also, something interesting that I read recently by Daniel L. Davis, the retired lieutenant colonel, is that Taiwan is actually they don't staff their military completely. Like only 60% of their positions along their shoreline and stuff actually have soldiers and stuff there, because they can't fill the ranks. And so you would think if there's all this existential dread in Taiwan of a Chinese invasion, people would be willing to fight for their homeland. And it just doesn't seem like they have a whole lot of people lining up to join their army and military to do so. Makes you question how much of a threat that's actually perceived by the people in Taiwan, and how much they really want to fight here. Maybe it's a situation like in the Middle East, they're interested in fighting the Chinese to the last American. All right, now Biden attended the uh, was it the Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN Summit. It was a virtual event, and there, while this was in Southeast Asia event, whereas China, Southeast Asia, and, there's a Chinese representative there. The U.S. and Biden took this opportunity to say they were deeply concerned by China's coercive actions in the region, and also said the U.S. is committed to Taiwan. In fact, the commitment is rock solid and consistent across administrations. It continues to be the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and within the region. And if Joe Biden really believes what he's saying here, it's a huge miscalculation. It was the policy of strategic ambiguity, the one China policy that for decades has maintained the peace. However, by saying that the U.S. is committed to defend Taiwan, it is breaking that policy. It is breaking the decades-long policy that has held the peace. And it's a delicate piece to say that when there's a military buildup on each side of the thing, and provocative like. Weapon sales from the U.S. to Taiwan, stuff like it hasn't been a perfect peace for all these years or anything like that. However, it's not like the U.S. has maintained a consistent policy either under Obama when we started our pivot to Asia, but it escalated the anti-China hostilities under Trump, and especially the support for Taiwan, more diplomatic ties, more weapons support. And then this has really accelerated even more under the Biden administration with more crossing of the Taiwan Strait, the new agreement with the UK and Australia to provide nuclear power submarines to Australia. And more traversing of the Taiwan Strait. And according to China, they say there's been 2,000 U.S. spy missions close to China in the past year. So all this very disturbing, very provocative towards China. Let's see, one more thing to talk about here. And that, again, this from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Blinken raises China tensions with calls for Taiwan to participate more in UN. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, writes Dave, increased tensions with China over Taiwan Tuesday when he called for UN member states to support Taipei's robust participation in the UN system. And so this is one of the complicated things about the US having a one China policy, because if there's one China, that means there's one China government. And honestly, if there is a China government, it is the government in Beijing, right? This is just like kind of as a matter of fact, if you look at things, how it kind of should be by the way the U.S. sets up this policy. Now, it does create some struggles for Taiwan and for the Taiwanese people. That is unfair. It is, like diplomatic warfare by China against Taiwan to some extent, right? Isolating them from the WHO during the pandemic, stuff like that. I'm not endorsing all these Chinese actions or saying that it's great to isolate, Taiwan from all these international bodies, but it is a part of the one China policy that the U.S. has maintained. And this is the U.S., another example of it, breaking and walking away from that policy. And we need to understand there's going to be reactions from China because of that. And so I think the U.S. is increasingly putting itself in a position where we are going to start to build up militarily, which is going to cause the Chinese reaction to build up militarily. And then we can never withdraw or de-escalate from that military because now China has additional military capabilities. And in fact, it's going to be an escalatory cycle over time. This is a dangerous position that the U.S. is putting itself in. Now, it seems really unlikely to me that China or Taiwan would ever really launch a war against each other. Peter Van Buren, who was a diplomat in the region for decades, explains this, I think, very well and makes very important points here. But at the same time, we recently had the USS Connecticut, which is a nuclear-powered spy sub, run into something in the South China Sea. So the more activity you have, the more risk you have of accidents leading to escalations. Also, even if it doesn't actually put like a war between U.S. and, or excuse not the U.S., Taiwan and China, kick off something like that, the more military assets the U.S. puts in the region, the more likely it is that we end up with some kind of skirmish in China, because we don't have the deep, long cultural ties that the people of Taiwan and China have with each other.